Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Softvision Suite's monthly webinar. My name is Megan Morse. I'm one of the customer success consultants here for Softvision Suite. I want to start off just by thanking you all for joining us today. Our topic of discussion for this webinar is focused on vendor management and some of the important steps that you can take to ensure a successful partnership. So we can get started here. An introduction for anybody who may be new on the call. This is our customer success team, and we're the ones that run these monthly webinars for you and are assigned to each of you to help ensure your success on the product. Always feel free to reach out to us directly or using the customer success email if you have any questions or need assistance with anything. A housekeeping reminders as we get started here. Everybody will be on mute to reduce any feedback and background noise. We would like this session to be as interactive as possible, so please use the Q&A icon located at the bottom of the screen to send us comments or questions throughout the session, and we'll address that. We'll also be recording this session today, so that will be available for you on our YouTube channel or our support site, and once that is ready for viewing, we'll also send you a follow-up email with a link to that. Okay. So for our agenda today, we're going to start off with reviewing some of the key concepts of vendor relationships and management, discuss what are those critical steps that you can take to ensure a successful partnership, and then also how you can set up and maintain and view a lot of this information within our systems. All right, and with that then, I'll hand it over to Linda to get us started off.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Megan. So I'm going to get started. We're looking at what is referred to the collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment spin wheel, otherwise sometimes referred to as CPFR. So this was first developed by GS1 in partnership with NRF. Some people may know GS1 was renamed. They used to be called VIX, Voluntary and Industry Consumer Standards. But both organizations spent years working to establish standards and supporting that retailer and vendor relationship. These standards were developed in partnership with vendors, retailers, direct-to-consumer companies, wholesalers, both large and small. The published guidelines review basically all the steps involved in a successful vendor relationship, all steps focusing on impacting the relationship with the end consumer. So the goal was to try to create consistent standards within the industry that reduced costs for the supply chain for everybody involved, both manufacturer and retailer. So if anybody is looking for a copy, all you need to do is go out to the internet and you can search on CPFR and you can find a lot of information out there that's available. But the spin wheel breaks our process, that vendor management and replenishment process, down into 4 key areas, focusing on strategy and planning and the steps involved. And those areas are basically sort of the vendor product sourcing, onboarding, educational factors. Then there's the demand and supply chain section, which is, where we start planning, forecasting. We talk through the replenishment steps. A lot of logistics and supply chain conversations happen here. Execution phase, we're all very familiar with that, where we start cutting purchase orders, delivering shipments. We receive and stock product on the shelves. And then finally, the analysis phase, where we go into performance management, anywhere from sales all the way down to vendor performance. So moving on to our next slide. So with all of our COVID events, with the challenges that people are currently having with resources, trying to find product, transportation, logistic issues, we've been hearing from our clients that teams are out trying to source new vendors, new products, heading to new countries to find product. So that is where we were like, okay, let's talk through vendor sourcing and all those key steps involved. And so we're going to primarily focus in 6 areas. So first, focusing on that understanding that everybody understands the roles and relationships involved with vendor onboarding. that people set up a specific onboarding process of the various steps, and that is communicated out both internally to your team members, but externally. We'll talk a little bit about some of the educational tools or manuals, the communication process with our vendors, if companies have vendor compliance programs or performance, and then how do we measure and manage that performance and evaluation process. So moving on to onboarding. So onboarding is kind of key, and one of the areas whether merchants will get back out and be able to go to market and find vendors, or if they are finding vendors currently as we're all working from home via email and everything else. One of the key things with merchants is to be able to provide them with access to a one-page checklist that they can easily email to vendors or that they can give to a vendor with in person. So the vendor understands what are all the steps that they're going to have to go through and accomplish to be able to do business with your company. And so that starts with basically easy access to all the forms that are needed, vendor setup forms, if you have agreements and everything like that. So in this digital age, most people, most companies nowadays have a vendor website, and that information is all available on that website, and talk through basically what the standard practice steps are. But the key is trying to identify those tasks so vendors can see that all the needed tasks are completed. If there's multiple steps to completion, for instance, vendor agreements, you may be going back and forth multiple times with communications, that they can see where is that task, who is it with, what's working on. Some PLM systems offer some of this as well. So vendors also need to understand, you know, onboarding. Is there going to be a compliance program? What are the requirements to that? You know, are there test reports that have to be, you know, reviewed, samples that have to be sent in? Are there hang tags, you know, that are going to have to be approved? And so providing that information, contact information in that checklist is also very key. So next is all the vendor manuals, the educational tools. So making those available through your vendor website, easy for the vendors to understand. Key is trying to break that down so everything is easily understood, it's accessible. If you can break a manual up into smaller sections so you can hand transportation off to that area, you know, and quality off to another. In some instances, we've seen examples where vendor manuals might be 3 inches thick. And if you think of that somebody's going to sit down and understand all of that and get all of that accomplished or read, chances of having issues during the onboarding process will happen. So again, trying to focus on what are the steps, those easy access checklist items. Next, moving into communication. So trying to identify contacts, whether they be all your internal contacts, so vendors have that information, email addresses, whether they be departments or individual people, trying to solicit the contact information from the vendor and having a process to keep that updated so that if there are logistical issues, those people can reach out and talk to the appropriate parties in both organizations. Websites can do a great job of tracking and managing that information. If your website can also track and manage vendor communication during the onboarding process so people can walk through and see what were the steps, what were being discussed, when was information completed. If there are metrics within communication, making sure the vendors know what are the metrics or KPIs that you're going to be using to measure performance. How often will those metrics be updated? How are they calculated? When will they be communicated out to the vendor, you know, to track performance? If you have a compliance program, making sure communication of those issues or infractions that surface are very quick and fast. So the vendor knows that, because if you have multiple purchase orders coming in, you want to make sure the vendor knows what issues surfaced on the first purchase order, that they can take corrective action before they get that second purchase order ships. And finally, as we move into that last phase and everything has done so well, we focus on performance. And any type of, publishing of the vendor metrics. A vendor scorecard is a fabulous tool to get out to your vendors. Some of the best vendor websites I've seen demoed or, been part of actually provide that vendor scorecard as almost a landing page when you get into the website. So everybody involved, whether it be sales reps or logistical people, can see instantaneously, what were the issues, where do they have opportunities. Making sure to offer, again, if there are opportunities, how do they correct them? What are the steps involved to kind of turn that around, and just basically ensuring the vendor knows who the contacts are again. So, so those are the key steps with vendor setup. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Megan.
Great, thanks, Linda. So as Linda has mentioned, when it comes to the vendor-retailer relationship, there are many different business units involved from both the vendor and the retailer side. So this graphic here on the screen just depicts some of the likely interactions that your business has with your vendors. So when it comes to demand planning and your inventory planners, planning for category plans or sales forecasts, the sales team on the vendor side, who is also going to work very closely with your buying team to identify those key items, what are the big items they should be purchasing or promoting for the upcoming season. And then also the customer service or logistics side from the vendor, working closely with your own retailer and replenishment to make sure that you are receiving your orders timely, they're passing quality assurance, and shipments and everything are as expected. With all of these different interactions, it's important for you to establish not only communication with the vendor, but also internal communication amongst your various business units that are all participating in these different activities. So for example, if you are continuously receiving merchandise that may either be late or damaged from a particular vendor, how are your buyers or your inventory planners alerted of this? Are they alerted of this in a timely fashion so that they can make any adjustments they may need to do to their inventory or any kind of promotional activity coming up? But then also consider these kind of situations as something that they should look at when it's year-end vendor evaluation and looking at how they're doing overall. So having this kind of information in a centralized system, or just a good way of deciding how you can effectively communicate this amongst your different team members, is really key to your success here. So if you move to the next slide. What we hear a lot, or what I've seen a lot out there, is a great way for you to accomplish this is by creating a vendor management team, or maybe just a few individuals who are centrally focused on identifying what are your business goals or KPIs for your vendor management. So not only just looking at the general process and overall and making sure that's working efficiently, but also when it comes to contract negotiations or agreements and year-end collections. If you have different divisions, possibly all purchasing from a vendor, how are they talking to each other or sharing what kind of contracts or terms they have set up with the vendor? This stuff is all important to share so that you're making sure that you're getting the best out of the relationship overall, especially if you're a large company with numerous interactions like that. Another step worth mentioning here, it's a simple step that you could implement pretty quickly, is making sure that your staff is interacting, whoever is interacting with the vendor is fully trained on your supply chain process, so that not only do they understand their step in the process, but they understand the total picture and any kind of repercussions that may come up if they were to bypass anything in the process. So it's just helping to avoid hiccups overall. And with that, then I will hand it over to Janine.
Great, thanks, Megan. All right, so from purely an inventory management perspective, the vendor impact that we have is centered around, obviously, delivery of the purchase orders that you're making out there. So it's one of the key functions that we have to worry about is managing back orders and fill rates with these vendors. So making sure that we're staying in touch with the vendors. But what I want to really kind of point out, and with some of the screenshots that I have, is reminding you the tools that we have within our Softvision suite that really help you find this information and be able to communicate out this information. So we want to make sure that you're really utilizing the tool. So obviously we've got back orders that you can see from the dashboard. We have reports on that. We have fill rates as well. As you're managing your product categories and assortment, you also have the ability to impact product development and any adjustments in your assortment. So you've got the hands-on view of how your SKUs are selling. So for products that aren't selling as well or are really selling well, you want to be able to make sure that you're communicating that out. So your immediate partners are obviously your vendors and your merchandising team. So we want to make sure that you are getting that information out to these two areas as quickly as possible, making sure that you are having frequent touch base calls or emails to discuss these types of topics. So your back orders, when you've got offers or ventures that are just launching, what the weekly demand and needs are, making sure that you're communicating, particularly in a situation where you've got business that's doing really well, getting that information out there, adjusting your forecasts and letting your vendors know. You want to be able to have that partnership built with them so that if you really need to pressure them to put more into production, push up deliveries, or in an instance, ask for help in delaying purchase orders coming out in a scenario where you've got softer sales. So some of the tools that I want to call attention to on the next several slides, I'm just going to touch on lightly. A lot of these we have really covered in all of our monthly webinars. So we certainly like to make sure that you're utilizing those as a refresher tool, as well as obviously reaching out to your customer success consultant to get additional information or assistance. But one of the things that we want to stress is that you have the option to use vendor rules within our application. And it does contain a lot of information that will control how the data is being used within the system. So one of the biggest ones is obviously MOQ, so minimum order quantities. Everybody runs across these, whether it's units or it's a cost that you need to manage. And you can either interface this data, edit it directly into the screen, or we have a MOQ rules upload. You would define the information here in the vendor maintenance screen on the vendor item tab. You also have the option to do case packs and align to lot. So these are really important when you're creating purchase orders, so you don't have to worry about worrying that you've ordered in multiples of 12 or 25. So this is a really great screen. I want to make sure that people know that it's there and is a great tool to use. Next screen. So with MOQ, once those rules are uploaded into the application, when you are creating your requisitions within our software, if you have MOQ rules in there and you're not meeting them, we will warn you and tell you that you need to address that and make sure that you increase your quantities to match that MOQ. You also have visibility to that MOQ in the materials planning screen. So it is visible, it's there for you, and it helps you purchase smartly from the vendor. Next screen. All right, so one of the things that we're wanting to make sure that you are looking at your assortment, you're looking at all your demand and your forecasts. This is just a snapshot of what a demand forecast plan looks like for Venture. For those of you that are using the Forecast 21 side of the application, you've got maps where you're looking and have your budgets to manage and the projections forecasts that you're creating. You also have the visibility to that in the product level forecasting screen where you're looking at a particular product across multiple offers. And that's the information that as you're assessing it and updating it, those are the details that you want to make sure that you are communicating out to your vendor, communicating out to your merchants. Next screen. All right, it's really important to understand your inventory position. So making sure that when you are trying to get a handle on deliveries and getting your product in here, one screen that is really useful, and it's available in product level forecasting, it's available in suggested purchase order, but the product history forecast graph, it's great for those who really like a visual. It will show you what your past demand was, what your future forecasts are, what your on-hand levels are. Again, if you need a quick snapshot as to what the inventory position is going to be, you have this option here. And the next screen. Another really important tool, I can't stress this enough, is our product variance screen. This is a screen that comes in to play when you have just dropped a catalog and or an offer, and you want to take a look at those items, how they are projecting versus how you forecasted it. And this can be done manually by keying in the filters that you want, or you can actually have a script run so that this refreshes daily for you. The purpose or the use of this screen is I would come in here based on a % variance, and if I want to take a look at my excess, well, not my excess, but you want to take a look at the products that are really overperforming. So I would sort on that, take a look to see how much of a difference I'm underbought, and I can immediately launch from this screen right into product level forecasting, where I can go in, make my adjustments to my forecasts, even potentially future offers that it might be in, and go ahead and get more on order. In the reverse, if you want to address those items that are underperforming, you can do the same thing, sort where your forecast is much higher than the projected quantities. And then this information you'd communicate to your merchants to potentially plan markdowns or get future placement. And this is information also that's helpful when talking to your vendors. And with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Stuart.
Thanks, Janine. This is Stuart. I'm going to go through vendor rules in suggested purchase order. For those that have a suggested purchase order, or SPO, you come into the vendor order review screen and you'd be able to set up different rules and discounts. You would do that by linking to vendor maintenance, which you could do directly within vendor order review or from the dashboard. So you could set up different rules here. You could see status this past. I had set up a rule saying that there is a minimum order quantity. And again, this is information you would get from the vendors. I could also set up a total order discount where if I buy above a certain amount, I'll get a discount off of the entire offer. In addition to that, I could set up a discount at a line level at either a product or SKU. So if I buy a certain amount of units, I'll get a discount. And you could see that here when we expand it, there's a discount here at this level. So clicking on vendor maintenance, if you go into rules and discounts, you could set up these different rules. You could have a begin and end date if it's for a certain period. If you don't put an end date, it'll just be from that beginning date on. At the level, you could do it at an order level, product, or SKU. So in this case, we're saying that the metric minimum is $10,000. And the metric could be currency, units, I believe there's also cases, and you know, some others. And I'll get into the dashboard to take a look at that. So here we're saying that this metric minimum is required. You have to order at least $10,000. The type here could be required, or it could be preferred, which is give you a warning, or just not checked. But in this case, you have to order that $10,000 that is required. Could also add order discounts. So if we're ordering over $50,000, we'll get a 10% discount. And that will be off of the whole order. Here you could do, for products or SKUs, you could do what's called tiered pricing. If you buy certain amounts, you'll get different discounts. So here, between $5,000 and $5,999, I'll get 5%. Over $6,000, 10%. Over $7,000, 25%. So you have these different tiers. Going back here, you could see how this worked is this did pass because we are over that $10,000. Here's my 10% order discount. and here's my 5% line level discount because I'm ordering this amount. So these are really good to set up because suggested purchase order will have those suggested requisitions based on rules that you have set up. And so you could go in and look at these rules to make sure that it's meeting them. And then when you create the requisition, it will show you the order discount here on the bottom. And it'll also show you the line level or the cost discount for this particular product or SKU. Now, going on to evaluating vendors, and Linda spoke in an earlier slide about a vendor scorecard. So what are some of the key performance indicators that we could look at? Well, you could look at pricing with regards to the cost. Is it competitive? Is a vendor charging a good price, compared to other vendors, that offer that similar merchandise? Margin, how is your margin? Now, the margin is related to the price that you're offering, but when we're looking at performance, we want to look at the overall margin for that vendor. And does a vendor offer any discounts similar to those vendor rules that we set up? Will they give you discounts for ordering larger quantities? With regards to delivery, the overall lead time. Sometimes, usually you can't change that, but it is something to evaluate. How long does it take to get that merchandise? Is it on time? Are they delivering it when they say they're going to, by that promise date, or is it coming in later or even earlier? Sometimes you don't want it earlier because you don't want to pay for it. So within our system, as you're writing requisitions, we store the original expected receipt date and then the revised. So that's something you could look at in reports to see how the vendor is performing. And are they flexible, especially during these last few months when you need merchandise right away in some of your categories? Is a vendor working with you? Are they working to get you that merchandise? You'd look at quality. How is the sizing and fit? Are you having complaints about it? Are you having a large amount of returns based on that? And in general, are you having excess returns? A lot of times for some of these categories, especially dresses or other clothing categories, you could have a high return rate, but by vendor, you want to look at the returns overall for that vendor. And the other is damage receipts. This is information that you get from the warehouse. Is the merchandise coming in, any of it damaged? Are the cartons, matching compliance? Are they matching the compliance on shipping? So a lot of this information you'll find out internally, outside of Softvision, communicating with the different departments, but some of these are also available within Softvision Suite and some reports. So here's some of the reports that have vendor information. Both margin and returns is in this profit SKU report. So by offer, you would be able to see by offer, by vendor, what is the margin, the gross margin, contribution margin, and then what is the return rate. So that's good to run to evaluate your vendors. In fulfillment, you could look at back orders. Those are your current open back orders, but to see what's your back order rate and what is it for these vendors, for your future back orders. In delivery, like I mentioned, we do store the original expected receipt date and then the revised receipt date. Has this changed a lot? And that's something you could look at in the schedule receipts. Now, this is receipts going forward. Softvision doesn't normally store historic receipts. In other words, you're sending us every day an open POS file that has that open order information. If the PO's been received, we normally do not store that. But you do have the option, and some companies do this, of interfacing historic receipts. So you could run some reports like FMSH receipts, which will show the actual receipt date and quantity. And there's another one, FMSH purchase order detail, that shows you the same information, but will also store that original historic receipt date. So if you're going to do a vendor evaluation, vendor scorecard, and you want that information in Softvision, it's important to interface these receipts. And here from the interface manual is this historic receipt record. It's not a large file. It doesn't take up a lot of space. If the information's available, it would really help you to interface this. So if you are interested, you could speak to your customer success consultant, also speak to your internal IT to see if they could send this information. And with that, I'm going to connect to a dashboard to go through MOQ. So in master scheduling, vendor maintenance, and I have that open here. So for this vendor, you see I'm on the vendor item tab. Here's this particular product. And the different color and sizes available. Here you could see the lot size or case pack I have entered. Now you could set up MOQ here, and when we say enforced, it means that you would have to have those units, those MOQs have to be met before you could issue the requisition. But you could set it up at different levels, and this all depends from what your requirements are for the vendor. Here I have it set up 60 for each of the SKUs. At a color level here, it's 360. And then at a product level, it's 720. So you may have a combination of these or just one or the other. If you do need to set this up at a color level, let's say you're only ordering this size and you're ordering 120. Well, you met the SKU minimum, but you didn't meet the color minimum. So you'd have to go in and buy some of the other sizes or increase that. So you could set this up at either SKU, color, or at a product level. So I'm going to go into materials planning to show you how this works. When you go into the product, you could see here in this miscellaneous section, MOQ units, and the E says it's enforced, 720 at a product level. If I click here at the SKU, you could see MOQ units is 60 at that level. So I'm going to collapse these sections to show you how this works when you're creating a requisition. So let's say I go here and I order the amount, that was my shortage that's here, and I go in and align to lot. I could see that some of these at a SKU level is less than 60. And this shows it here in red. If I go into one of these SKUs, see here I'm ordering 48. If you hover over it, you gotta get it really there. You could see it'll tell us units of 48, but your MOQ is 60. So you could go in and you could change it here, or if you go to the requisition itself, you do have the option to adjust it. So let me just move this up here even more. So here we could see in red, we have our MOQ units at a product level 720. Here's the color level. And here you could see that we are below this MOQ. We could right click on the quantity and adjust MOQ all, or just that line. And that will automatically adjust the MOQ. You could also do it up here as well to adjust the MOQ. So that's something I don't know if a lot of customers know about, but it's easy to go in here and make that adjustment. All right, I'm going to go into now vendor order review. So we spoke about these rules with suggested purchase order, and this is a screenshot that I had before. You could see that the status is passed. It passed because we ordered the minimum. I also have my 10% order discount, and I have my line discount. So if I go here to vendor maintenance, is where I could set this up in this rules discount tab. So you could set up new ones. You could have a start date whenever you want. You may have an end date, or if you leave off an end date, it'll just go for that whole time. Level, it could be order, product, or SKU. Here's the metric. It could be currency units, weight, cube, cases, or pallets, however you're setting it up. So depending on different rules you're getting from the vendor, you would set these up. And so you could see here, you would go in, fill this in, and then add. But you see here that my currency, my minimum is $10,000. And you see the type here is required. Required means that you need to meet that minimum or you can't create the requisition. Preferred will give you a warning, and not checked would not check that at all. So you might have one or more of these. Here there's a discount at the order level, and here's that tiered pricing that we spoke about. So between 5,000 to 6,000, I'll get the 5% discount. Higher, I'll get additional discounts. And the system will automatically calculate that for you. Now, let's say I went in here, and let's say this requisition didn't have these two. I'm going to just uncheck this. Hit apply. You see that the status has failed. And so when you click on that, it'll say the required minimum order is $10,000. So if you went in there and tried to create the requisition, you're going to get a message that it failed the required rule. Make the necessary adjustment. So you could go in here. I'm just going to select them all, and then it'll pass. But it's good to have this status set up so this way you could see what are the minimums that I have. Are there any questions at all on MOQ or on these rules?
Nothing has come through so far.
All right, then I'm going to go back to the presentation. And just a summary, it's important to review all your vendors, but especially your top vendors. You know, you may have the 80-20 rule. 80% of your business is coming from 20% of your vendors. For a lot of companies, that's the case. So it's really important to review your vendors. Continuously assess that relationship. Make sure you're in contact with them. Make sure their business is doing fine, you know, and that you are speaking with them. All different departments are speaking with them. So communication is critical. Internally, make sure that merchandising is speaking to finance, is speaking to the warehouse, is speaking to inventory, is speaking to marketing, and that you're all speaking to the vendors, all right, and having that communication. When you speak about vendor SKU optimization, take a look at your top vendors and see how many SKUs they're handling. If you have one vendor that's handling a large percent of your business, that might be a risk, because if anything happens to that vendor, something's going to happen with your business and your business is going to be in trouble. So it's just important to take a look at the number of SKUs that your vendors are sending you. And finally, develop an internal team lead. Make sure that there's someone looking at these reports and looking at these key performance indicators. And with that, I'll hand it back to Megan.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up today's session. If you do have any questions that you wanted to submit, please go ahead and do that now. Next month, our topic of discussion will be on venture forecasting, and we have that scheduled for July 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Doesn't look like we've had anything else come through, so we'll wrap up for today. Thanks again for spending time with us. We hope that you found this session valuable, and we hope that you have a good rest of your day.